Hi, Ron.
There, how's it going?
Great, thanks. Stacy Kuznetsov will be doing your introduction and we'll start at usually about like 5 minutes late, like 3:05.
Oh, okay. So I'll just chill here for a bit.
Do you have slides to share?
Got nothing.
Got nothing. Great, no worries.
Okay. Yeah, it's one of those where it's like, okay, I'm putting this together for the university amid all this other stuff. So, a little sidetracked. Anyway, thanks.
Hi, Stacy.
Oh, hi. How are you?
Great, thanks. Ron's also here. Ron said he doesn't have slides, so do you have his introduction ready?
I sure do.
We'll start at 3:05. So and then we'll cut this part from the YouTube stream later. We're already streaming on YouTube, I believe. Don Marinelli is there. He said hello to everybody.
Oh, great. Hi.
Stacy, I've made you a co-host of this meeting. Also make Ron a co-host in case he wants any sort of these privileges.
Thanks. Wouldn't know what to do with them, but thank you.
Stacy, I've passed you the YouTube link through the chat as well. So you can go there to moderate if you see anything interesting popping up on the chat there.
Okay.
Dawn does say it's a beautiful day in Pittsburgh for a change. And Devin Arm says hi.
So shall we start?
Yeah, I think it makes sense too.
All right, so I am very excited to introduce Ron Broglio today. He is a professor of British literature and co-director of the Institute for Humanities Research, or IHR, at Arizona State University. And he's also the director of Desert Humanities. Ron is a field marshal of the animal revolution. The revolution will not be televised nor tweeted, but its modalities are alive for those who have ears to hear and eyes to see. Today, he's going to tell us about this revolution in a talk titled Hack the System, Animals in Revolt. So I would like to welcome Ron Broglio.
Hey, thanks for that, Stacy. And thank you all for coming. I know under these circumstances, it can be a bit odd. My goal here, I don't have any slides or anything. This is a very sort of lo-fi presentation, is I'm going to be reading a bit from a book I'm writing called Animal Revolution. And I hope to finish it this summer. So you're getting a preview. I've really not read much from this. And I think you'll see echoes of our current situation in the book a bit. And I might do some casual asides from time to time. It plays with cultural history, philosophy, and technologies of different sorts. So I'm just going to start reading, and then we can kind of I'll figure from there. And of course, if you have questions or comments, you can use the chat function in Zoom. Okay. Let's see. Screen. So this first part is called the exploit. We'll be talking about soap bubbles and the philosopher Immanuel Kant, a mantis shrimp, military supercarriers and a spineless animal, other nuclear power problems, and finally, hacking the body. Start with a quote from Shakespeare's Hamlet: "Time is out of joint." So humans and animals occupy the same earth, but live in different perceptual worlds. And this is fundamental insight of an Estonian zoologist called Jakob von Uexküll, who's the founder of behavioral physiology. Now, Jakob planned on earning his living the old-fashioned way, by inheritance. And his was an early 20th century life of leathered chairs and private libraries, pre-prandials on the veranda, summering in seaside Italy villas, and a respectable university education. He was well-read in philosophy, skilled in music, and combined these passions with a passion for biology and a hobbyist enthusiasm for natural history and collecting. So it was all going quite well until Bolshevism and the Russian Revolution appropriated the aristocratic wealth and forced the now middle-aged Jakob into working for a living. And so he did what any good deposed aristocrat might do. He founded his own center. He was at the University of Hamburg, and he made himself the director by bestowing on himself and in doing so, he bestowed on himself legitimacy and a job. Now, even for his day, the Institute for Environmental Research was a rather unusual venture, since it combined Uexküll's interest in physiology, that is, how the body works, from his university days, with a broad interest in philosophy and aesthetics. Now, among the books in Jakob's library was a well-worn collection of the works of the 18th century German philosopher Immanuel Kant. Paging through these dense volumes, he reflected on the critique of pure reason, the foundation of Kant's thinking, and what garnered him the title of the Copernicus of philosophy. See, Copernicus shifted from a Ptolemaic universe with the Earth as the center to a heliocentric solar system. Now, for Kant, the shift was from a thing-centered universe to a perceiver-centered one. We do not see things as they are, rather we perceive them as they are for us, as they appear to our senses. And it's like having a vacuum with a special triangle-shaped adapter that only sucks up triangle-shaped things. Emptying the bin, you discover the world is made up of triangles. And what doesn't get vacuumed up and what we miss are all the other shapes. Kant was the guy who figured out our cleaner attachment apparatus. Now, Uxkol began to think about flies, and he was talking about ticks, cats, bees, and earthworms, and their physiological differences. There were so many vacuums with so many accessories. Then he imagined each animal's perceptual world not as a vacuum cleaner, but as if it were a soap bubble surrounding the animal. Quote, when we ourselves step into one of these bubbles, the familiar meadow is transformed. Many of its colorful features disappear. Others no longer belong together, but appear in new relationships. A new world comes into being. He coined the term Umwelt, or surrounding world, to capture this perceptual bubble. Each of us is in a bubble, trying to imagine what it is like to step into another's. And I gotta tell you, these days, that seems quite the case. So in an online series called The Oatmeal, and you may know this series, The Oatmeal, Matthew Ingham writes witty, nerdy comics that combine strange facts, human emotions, and wonder. And among his best known is Why the Mantis Shrimp is My Favorite New Animal. In it, Ingham explores the alien soap bubble of animal life through some basic physiology, starting with sight. You may already know this, of course. Dogs have two color receptor cones, one the green, and one on the green. They're both on the green and blue spectrum. So humans have three cones: green, blue, plus red. The extra cone gives us a wide color combination, like moving from a crayon basic color set to an expansive full box set with aquamarines and burnt siennas and pine tree green and a pinkish mauve color called marvelous. A butterfly has 5 color cones, and we are left to speculate, what is it that the butterfly sees that we do not? What color cones are out there what colors are out there to be experienced that are beyond our grasp? And at this point, Ingham introduces the mantis shrimp punchline. Dogs have 2 color cones, humans 3, butterflies have 5 color cones, and the mantis shrimp has 16 color cones. Yes, 16. Quote, the rainbow we see stems from just 3 colors. So try to imagine a mantis shrimp rainbow created from 16 colors. Where we see a rainbow, the mantis shrimp sees a thermonuclear bomb of light and beauty. The dog, the human, the butterfly, and the shrimp all see the same earth, but experience it at their own different perceptual worlds, each in a different bubble. Each animal experiencing its perceptual truth, which aligns with the elusive thing as they are, and yet never reaches the rich textured things in themselves. So for Kant, even basic building blocks of reality like space and time are subjective experiences shaped by the way our minds and bodies perceive the world. Uxkol tested space and time on animals. He combed through vast, far-flung scientific findings about starfish eyes, owl lodging, cricket chirps held to microphones, and fish ears for navigation, chickens and ducks guiding their young, sea anemones' reaction to shadows. He imagines through their physiological apparatus what space and time might be like for them. So, for example, the Siamese fighting fish responds to motion twice as quickly as we do. And so their fastest perceptual movement of time is twice ours. We use the euphemism snail's pace for moving slowly, but for this fish, with its rapid reaction time, we are the snail. Meanwhile, prodding actual snails, Uxkol discovers their perceptual sense of movement is 1/7 our own. Seven human movements and 14 beta fish movements go by for one snail unit of time. But even this is a false equivalent, since a snail never misses the moments it can't perceive. Time and space work differently for each animal in its soup bubble, and it gets more complex since the animal is part of its own world too. So there's the feedback loop. The animal reacts to what it senses as a world, and this reaction produces an effect in the world and feeds into the animal's way of dwelling. Now, later, Umwelt takes on a life of its own with Rodney Brooks, who's director of the MIT Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Lab, who imagines life world of robots. Fiddling with sensors and programming machines, Brooks describes the life world of artificial intelligence robots in the language of Uxkol. Quote, an external observer, us humans say, might see a different embedding of the animal in the world than the animal itself sees. This is going to be true of our robots too. We will see them as sort of like us, anthropomorphizing them, but their sensing, action, and intelligence will make them very different, and very different in the way that they interact with the world. So even in the case where we design the machines, their world or soap bubble is beyond our grasp. The popular version of this problem might be the 2013 sci-fi romantic drama Her, in which the AI voiced by Scarlett Johansson awkwardly connects with and then supersedes the needs and desires of her human counterpart, played by Joaquin Phoenix. The AI system processes sensory and data and information at such speeds and without human same feeling, such that human speeds of sharing and feeling are too slow and too small for the machine's well-articulated and capacious curiosity. Umwelt is also important for understanding the animal revolution, where non-human perceptions do not always coincide with human needs and desires. They aren't here for us. While we are busy with our own techno-capitalist world, building ever smarter cities and plotting just-in-time international flights and shipping routes, other animals, and we might include viruses there, are doing their own animal thing, burrowing, nesting, foraging, roaming, migrating, creating vectors. Sometimes humans and animal worlds fit together, as when my dog understands my outstretched hand to be pointing at something at a distance. And sometimes the human and animal worlds don't fit. And when they don't, the two usually go about unnoticed by each other. We pay little attention to the myriad birds and bugs and beasts. But as we humans span the globe in increasingly complex waves, we come up against or bump up against the friction of other animals who perceive the earth differently. Time and space between humans and animals is out of joint, and the disjunction serves as an opening for the revolution. Let me give you a few examples. Consider the following animal revolutionary incident, and it begins in January 2006 with one of the largest naval vessels in history, the USS Navy Nemesis-class supercarrier. the USS Ronald Reagan cuts a formidable path across the ocean. Gray gunmetal for the length of 3 football fields, rising some 20 stories above the water and weighing in at 100,000 tons. It is a military fortress at sea. Bearing 70 planes and a well-trained crew of 5,000, the ship sets off from San Diego on its maiden deployment. The mission: support the US forces in the Iraq War. The Reagan made it to Brisbane, Australia, and docked to resupply and allow the crew some time on land. There, the ship was held hostage to an unforeseen, spineless foe. Floating idly along the coastline, translucent blue membranes absorbed the warmth of shallower waters and sunny days. In heartbeat-like rhythms, they pulse, taking in water and pushing it out to propel just a bit further along the ocean current. These few blubber jellyfish, going with the waves, happen upon a cross current, pushing them further inland and bringing with it other jellies. Soon a bloom of translucent membranes is moving in undulating waves towards Brisbane's military port. It is a slow yet insistent swarm. Then, one after another, after tens of thousands of protein membranes push up against a gray gunmetal fortress where they are decidedly and insistently stopped. Undulating against the ship's steel plates, the jellies encounter another current, one that draws vast amounts of water toward the vessel's engines, where 2 Westinghouse nuclear reactors are ever thirsty for water to cool its core. The unwitting animals have gained entry into the vital center of the warship. It is like a scene for the 1977 Star Wars film, where rebels against the Empire discover an exhaust port that will lead to the destruction of the Death Star. 1, 2, tens, hundreds, and thousands of jellyfish follow with the flow of water along vast pipes until they've nowhere else to go. They push and crowd and crush each other with membranes and tentacles and goo filling sucked pipes. Pounds of jellyfish flesh become a ton of jellyfish that is enough to prevent water from entering the engine's condensers. The problems begin to show up on the ship's monitors as engine temperatures rise, and without the seawater, the nuclear reactors are dangerously overheated. The situation becomes worrisome, and then a concern, and then a threat. The local fire department is called in, and the commanding officer orders the ship systems shut down and switch to backup generators. So, an $8.5 billion, 100,000-ton might of the US military, with its frictionless command of the global seas, was stymied by spineless, rudderless animals who went with the flow of things straight into the bowels of the military vessel. These markers of animal resistance make us rethink our dominion over the globe. Jellyfish have been around far longer than humans, and they have lived on Earth some 700 million years, making them contenders for the oldest multi-organ animal. And unwittingly, we are helping the jellyfish survive. As we troll the seas for fish, we're hauling out their predators and their competitors for food. Acidification of the oceans due to global warming further eliminates the jellyfish predators, and competition further eliminates the jellyfish predators and competitors for food. And with greater human exploration and commercialization of the world's oceans, jellyfish have become a worrisome problem, then a concern, and yes, now a threat that will not stop. In oceans impoverished of fish, jellyfish multiplied to fill the void. The last 2 decades have seen six-fold explosion of jellyfish. The Sea of Japan alone has some 20 billion floating membranes of resistance. Ships wade through a sea of jellies, and coasts are littered with their carcasses. There's a woman, Lisa Ann Gershwin, who in Stung accounts for a number of other destructive jellyfish blooms. And this includes December 10th, 1999, when 40 million Filipinos lost electricity. With over half the nation without power, speculation began that there was a coup or an attack from the Islamic Liberation Front on the unstable government of Joseph Estrada. The actual cause of was a bloom of jellyfish that floated from the coast and into the cooling system of the power plant. As the Philippine Star reported the incident, quote, "Here we are at the dawn of a new millennium in the age of cyberspace, and we are at the mercy of jellyfish." The promise of a frictionless cyberspace and a utopian new millennium gives way to a different animal comportment on the earth. It is a coup of sorts, not overthrowing one head of state or another, and not a revolution of conscious political will. Rather, the jellies are markers of durational earthly animal existence against our worlding. They reconfigure winners, losers, political stakes, and alliances. The first recorded outage due to jellyfish was a coal-fired plant in Australia in 1937. Nuclear power plant closures due to jellyfish include 1983, 84, 1993, and 2011. Reactors at the St. Lucia nuclear power plant in Florida, the Turkey nuclear power plant in Florida in 84, the Tornez power plant in Scotland, and Shimane nuclear power plant in Japan in 2011. Of course, there's the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant in 2012, Sweden's Swedish power plant in 2005, and then again in 2013. So whether it's cutting through the ocean on the battleship or feeling the nested comfort of a home powered by a local power plant, what humans are doing is making a world with less friction and less felt connection to the rest of the earth. Human culture is an attempt to elide, evade, and forget our bodies on this earth. We eat with utensils rather than our hands. We prefer the ease and speed of internet messages to the friction of pen and paper. And even airports construct bathrooms with minimum of bodily contact to physical surfaces, ostensibly so that bodies do not exchange germs. We live in culture and an Umwelt that represses our body's connection to the earth. And so animality, with its sheer corporality and presence, goes unaccounted for. Occasionally, an animal goes contrary to human will, becomes a clever one-off event circulated by social media, laughed off, and then quickly forgotten. But a collection of such events is designed to rupture our soap bubble and to cause us to think about our relationship with the earth. Another way to think about the bursting of our bubble is what philosophers Alexander Galloway and Eugene Thacker have called the exploit. The term comes from computer science, where a hacker finds a weakness in an operating system's defenses and uses this opening as a portal to entry. Shifting from computers to biological systems, we can say that the animal revolution finds a hole in our cultural system, which works so hard to keep us away from the corporality of the earth on which we live. Animals exploit this opening where culture has failed to sheath the physicality of the human body. The blunt tool of the revolution is the body itself, which exploits a weakness in human civility, the corporality of the human animal. And yes, we do have an animality. Yes, there are jellyfish who happen upon a hole in our defenses and let themselves in only to jam our machinery. Animals rub up against our attempts to ward them off, and they do so in a way that exposes a weakness in the system. In a non-linguistic but intense and intensive mode of communicating with us, they are making us aware of a larger than human world, an earth teeming with other creatures that do not live politely on our terms. So that's one chapter. I have a little bit more time, so I'm going to give you a little bit more stuff if that's good with you. Okay, let's see. We're going to do two things here. Let's start with this, multiplicities. So, as you know, there's, what do you call a group of geese together, a gaggle, etc. So, multiplicities. A flamboyance of flamingos, a swarm of bees, a bloat of hippopotamus, a convocation of eagles, a colony of rabbits, an unkindness of ravens, an obstinacy of buffalo, a smack of jellyfish, a mob of kangaroo, a troop of kangaroo, a shrewdness of apes, a zeal of zebra, a leap of leopards, a sledge of crane, a crate of badgers, a shadow of jaguars, a labor of moles, a team of pigs, a caravan of camels, a colony of goats, a quiver of cobras, a destruction of wild cats, a basque of crocodiles, a lounge of lizards, a pack of wolves, a gang of elk, a cast of falcons, a skulk of foxes, a deceit of lapwings, a business of ferrets, an army of frogs, a tower of giraffes, a band of gorillas, a cackle of hyenas, a conspiracy of lemurs, a prickle of porcupine, a colony of rats, a shiver of sharks, a stench of skunks, a knot of toads, a fever of stingray, an ambush of tigers, a murder of crows, and a wake of buzzards. Okay, so that was the interlude. And now just very quickly, a small bit on the animal revolution. And you can already see I'm playing the relationship between human technology as a way of worlding and constructing a world, and animals' way of viewing a world, and where these two are jamming up against each other. So in AME and your work, one of the things you might think about is, for whom are we designing these systems? And also, how do these systems, as in artificial intelligence, how these systems thinking beyond our thinking, right? Or how are they sensing in ways other than our sensing? So those might be some of the ways of connecting with this material. In fact, in the early 2000s, some of the leading game operators were asked, "What are you working on these days?" And they said, "Well, I've created this virtual reality space in which I'm a lobster at the bottom of an ocean." I think that is just beautiful, right? So what would that be like to embody lobsterness? And what would be the variables to the ocean, the currents, the things to eat, the things that might float by, etc. Okay. So revolution, an interlude. Animals of the world, unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. I've tried handing animals weapons, kitchen knives, a slightly rusted backyard chain, a shotgun, tools for the revolution. Lord knows they need a revolution and have suffered enough abuse from the hands of humans. They gently stare at me blankly. They look at the anthropomorphic machines I extend to them and stare at them again, blankly. With bare look and still corporeal thickness, these animals make no motion towards arming themselves. And now I feel like the idiot. What do I know about their revolution? And perhaps they already come armed. Perhaps the revolution is underway in modalities I have yet to know, and beyond which I can reason within the limits of my anthropocentric sensibility and sociability. And indeed, why would they tell me about their revolution? The revolution will not be televised, mediated, or co-opted by our representational systems. These tales and minor incidents are small evidence of something much larger happening just outside of human culture. It is a revolution at the margins for us, but central to them, a revolution that is proper to the animals and only improperly within my grasp. That is, animals jam the gears of the well-oiled social machine. Our cogs assimilate bodies into units, elements to be processed and digested by civilization. A meat tenderizer pounds flesh into socially acceptable and digestible parts. Then comes the revolution. Not all at once, but in speeds and slownesses not on our scale. It puts a friction to the tenderizing gears. Revolution does not speak to us in our language. Animals are not socially discursive, complaining ever so kindly about, would you mind not unearthing so much oil in the ocean where I live and eat? Or consider not moving your suburb into my den, or leaving lead lying about where I might inadvertently eat it. Thank you very much. Sincerely, the animals. No, it's not like that. They are not socially discursive to us. The animals are intensive. They strike. Their strikes, interruptions, forces, resistances, and vectors, some of which I've cataloged in this book that I'm working on, register in our world without the need for human language. They shatter our words and ways with a crash that just might cause us to look up from the busyness of human being and notice a larger earth with myriad non-human worlds. Perhaps one of the best explanations of animals living, thinking, and revolting comes from Nobel-winning author J.M. Coetzee's short book, The Lives of Animals. And as Coetzee tells the story, an irascible elderly novelist, Elizabeth Costello, is invited to address an elite college. But rather than lecture on her work, she expounds upon animal cruelty. In a conversation with her son and the faculty and the public, she explains society's blindness to treatment of animals. When asked about animal intelligence, she defiantly explains that as much as she would like to discuss the topic, she doubts the audience would listen openly. Instead, we consistently refuse to recognize any intelligence that does not look like us. And aside here is I have a whole chapter on the human species. We often say, why aren't there intelligent animals like us? Well, you know, the human species is in a great deal responsible for killing Neanderthals, right? About, what was that, 25,000 years ago. So where are these intelligent species? We killed them. So when pressed, Costello goes on to say that animals do not respond to us in words, but rather with gestures of the living flesh. She pronounces, anyone who says that life matters less to animals than it does to us has not held in his hands an animal fighting for its life. The whole of its being of the animal is thrown into the fight without reserve. When you say that the fight lacks a dimension of intellectual imagination, I agree. It's not the mode of being of animals to have intellectual horror. Their whole being is the living flesh. Animality of the body, its weight and fur, which resists the glide of human meaning, our sign systems and abstractions, insists that there is an elsewhere, not knowable within the register of our social constitution of knowing. The body, the call of the wild, the call of the animal, the call of revolution carries a heft and a mass of thinking that happens elsewhere in brute physicality or wily maneuvering of animality that threatens our systems of language, symbols, signs, weights, and measures with a materiality and a semiotics the human meaning does not welcome to the table, but which arrives as an uninvited guest. To follow the possibility of revolution incurs risk. There's the possibility that all these non-human forces going bump in the night are just nonsense, inarticulate and meaningless blather. And yet I hear a voice saying blather to whom? It is always possible that such a collapse of distinction between inside the circle of human meaning and outside, between meaning and nothingness, will produce an undifferentiated noise, a worthless heap, a body, a weight pressed against our world. And yet, here, in a heap, bodies and bluntness undermine human sensibility, human constructed good sense and common sense, and take us elsewhere outside our social selves. And this is all very well. Yes, animals get their way, but an erudite scholar taking up this thin treatise might tusk and say, how's this a revolution? Where are the animals who in Marxist fashion are reaching for class consciousness, or in this case, species consciousness, and revolting against the human overlords? How can it be a revolution without self-awareness of one's social position, as well as knowing what one is fighting for and against? And here I'll wrap up quickly. Such questions from the scholastic armchair are, of course, human questions, an imposition of our categorical imperatives into the field of the animal's action. Let us recognize that there is no word or concept by humans proper to this intensive clash. Revolution is our convenient translation for something beyond our comprehension. Consider it this way. The worst case for a victim is not having a just court of appeal. For animals, whose court would they appeal to? A human court will always side with humans, using human laws, human language, human reasoning, and human mechanisms of enforcement. Witness, for example, the expansion of humans across the globe at the demise of other species. Even an enforcement of rights for animals is on human terms and deliberated for and by us. Justice for animals would mean different courts, different laws, new languages, and certainly something other than our current state of affairs. And yet, impoverished as the radical term revolution is, we settle on this as a way of expressing animals upending the system. Let's dispel the notion of revolutions or a singular unified conscious effort. Even amid best known revolutions in human history, different people are fighting for different things. Sometimes these differences become organizationally manifest as factions or splinter groups, which is just a way of recognizing we're all in the fight, but for different reasons and with different strategies. Next is the problem of consciousness, or as Marx says, class consciousness. It's a problem later philosophers addressed in post-structuralism by explaining we are never fully aware of our social and economic position, and they add, we cannot escape power relations, power imbalances, and unseen ideological structures. Which is to say, while some are better than others, every consciousness is a false consciousness in Marx's terms. Since, with a paranoid critical eye, we can see the animals are getting at something that undoes human technologies and cultures in myriad ways and at different scales and temporalities across the globe. Let us, in perhaps Dadaist fashion, or with a meaning that stumbles because language fails us here, let us call this an animal revolution. Okay, so that's what I got for you today. Thanks for listening. Happy to take any questions or comments if you have any, but certainly given the parameters of Zoom, understand if you don't have any.
I think everyone is clapping in the chat. Adam just said he's clapping, and so am I.
Thanks so much. You're one of the first folks I've tried this material out on, so I appreciate your listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. I guess we'll open for questions. I think Robert is moderating too, and I think the format is people will type the question in the chat.
Oh, you can raise your hand. We don't have the hand raising, but if you click on Manage Participants and you just choose any of those icons, we'll call on you, or Stacy can call on you, and then you can unmute yourself and ask a question.
Christy says in the chat that she loves thinking about what the animal revolution could look like.
Yeah, this is what I spend most of my time thinking about, and it's been interesting. I've been working with Adam, with Matt Bell, who's a creative writer in our English department, and is really a great writer. His recent collection of short stories is very good. But I was working with Matt to move from academic writing to something that is a little more creative or descriptive, and that has a kind of thick description to it, where it builds into a kind of poetry. And that's really that's taken me. It's really hard to shift from academic writing, which is basically explaining and pronouncing, right, to something that is, rather than telling, showing, actually just describing things. And one way to say that is academics will say 2 + 2 = 4, whereas creative writers will say 2 + 2 and let the reader discover the 4. And it's so hard to pull back and just do that thick description and allow people to come to their own conclusions.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I'm going to try to unmute Devin, who has a question. So Devin, I think you're able to speak now.
I think so, yeah. Ron, great talk. I really enjoyed it. I made me think of Orwell's Animal Farm. And I'm wondering if the actual animal revolution, rather than being led by the pigs, ostensibly the most intelligent animals, be led by other, maybe the ticks and the jellyfish and the things that we wouldn't necessarily think of being sort of the vanguard of it.
Yeah, thanks for that. I do have a chapter actually that starts with Animal Farm because of the problem of analogy in it. I once went through trying to black out all the analogies in the novel and just leave the actual animal bits. And the problem was I was blacking out the whole novel, which I guess in some ways would be an interesting art project in itself. But yeah, so the idea is that you're mentioning here is not to anthropomorphize. And as much as we do, we miss all these other types of animality. And of course, this is, one of the problems we're coming up with this pandemic is types of animality that we couldn't totally take seriously. We were warned about this thing, but it didn't have a good PR campaign, despite perhaps several Hollywood movies about pandemics. It just didn't have the PR campaign that would galvanize us, and so has really undercut the just-in-time global capitalism. So here, COVID is a good example of that revolution, of something jamming our social gears. And then I see Adam's also asking, how do we humans care for the animal revolution when it might very well undo the human? And so I have another chapter on hospitality. And of course, Adam's probably going to know what I'm going to say here because he's read Derrida. on hospitality. But he says, basically, Derrida says, it's easy to be hospitable to those who are friends, right? Because that's just being a friend. What's radical hospitality is to be hospitable to those who are the unexpected guest, those who we did not invite in, right? And in doing so, how does that change the way we might think, live, or dwell? Okay, so how does that change us? And are we willing to be changed by that? I think, you know, if we think about the current state of affairs with this, this pandemic, the question becomes, are we willing to be changed by this? Is global capital willing to be changed by it? Are we willing to change the way we live, not just temporarily, but maybe what are the lessons learned for other ways of living, thinking, dwelling, and being? So those are the revolutionary possibilities.
Ron, I have a question.
Yeah.
If you could pick any animal to lead the revolution today, what would that animal be, or group of animals?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. Obviously, right now, the one leading is this virus. And the revolution comes in many different forms. I just finished a chapter on aliens, which is another problem that Kant comes up with. And he says, of the hierarchy of animals, he puts humans on top, like all 18th century folk. But he says, how do we know that we are rational animals? In order to know if we are rational animals, there must be rational extraterrestrial animals. So he says, in effect, he says, we need aliens in order to prove we're intelligent, which in fact is how every Hollywood film is. You know, either the aliens are more intelligent than us, or they're friends with us, or they're enemies, but there's always a validation of communicative intelligence in some fashion. So the aliens are interesting, but then Carl Sagan was working with this dolphin biologist, Lilly, and in the 60s. And Lilly was working with both, he was the father of both the Defense Department dolphins, the radical militarized dolphins, and the TV show Flipper. So the peace-loving dolphins. So both those images come from Lilly. And Sagan was talking with Lilly, and basically he said, if we want to understand aliens, we should first understand animals. And in fact, animals are the aliens among us. So perhaps the dolphins, and along with many others, we could give them their due. And there is a great Simpsons episode in which the dolphins rise up against humans and take over the world, by the way. So there you are. Oh, and yes, Byron, the crows are considered, their groups are considered to be murderers. And it's weird, all these different names for, like, I love the conspiracy of lemurs. I guess lemurs are called a conspiracy, or the deceit of lapwings. Like, if
Yes,
you have
but the semantics of Byron's question is interesting. Do crows consider their groups to be murderers?
Oh. Huh. Yeah, but is it murder to kill something outside your species, you know? Which is the ethical question we're up against sometimes as well. Because, you know, many humans kill animals and don't think of it as murder. Think of it as hunting or food or survival. So maybe the crows have the same issue. I don't know. There's also really interesting work being done between elephants and humans, because elephants have been so hunted in Africa, they have, they're acting in ways that psychologists have thought is PTSD. And so they've started studying human PTSD and elephant behavior and noticing they're similar. And so now, because of some of the wars in Africa where humans are experiencing PTSD, they're grouping some humans and some elephants to help cross heal. So that might be a more of a velvet revolution there.
Okay, Ron, thank you so much. This was a fascinating talk and Q&A. And I guess with that, we will applaud at our own desks and in our own homes.
Right on. Thanks so much. Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ron. That was beautiful.
All right, right on.
Okay.